Okay, they can hear my audio. If anyone's in the chat, let me know how the levels are. Kind of messed around with them a little bit today. And yeah, let's get started. Welcome to the live stream. We've got a good one today. We're joined with Jeff. Jeff, how you doing?
Very well. It's been a while since I've done this.
yeah, I think we both are probably going to have to shake off some cobwebs for the first few minutes.
But I'm glad to be doing it once again with you because usually that's how it goes. I take a long break from the internet and then I come back and talk to you first.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's an honor to have that sort of a position. So today we're going to be watching the video that I made, the hidden meaning of Skyrim. Viewers of my channel or my content will remember that I've made other hidden meaning of movies. There was the hidden meaning of Lego and the hidden meaning of Subnautica. Now there's Skyrim in addition to that. So Jeff, you got a bit of a sneak peek before I released it. What was your first thought? I think you had said that you never played Skyrim, right?
That's true. Yeah. But you also noted this on Discord afterwards that you've kind of found your wheelhouse with this the Gnostic uncovering the secret Gnostic messages behind various media, right? So
Mm-hmm.
Lego movie, Subnautica, and now Skyrim.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you said that I kind of get it too. It's like on the one hand, it's kind of cool that you found this like your sweet spot, but on the other hand, you also don't want to get locked into it, right?
Well, if I'm right, it's kind of like if I'm right, I'm happy to do it. But I'm also kind of afraid that now that I am so able to do this, I'll start to put pieces together that don't really fit. That's really what I'm
Well,
kind of nervous about. Um, because I
do
think
you
that,
think though, if one looks hard enough, they'll always find some Luciferian or Gnostic undertone behind every piece of media?
well, that's kind of the conclusion that I've come to in a way. And it's almost like whether there is or isn't something like that in it, an argument could be made suggesting that there could be. And um,
Hmm.
like I think that the Lego movie really very much was like deliberately. There's no way that kind of a thing was an accident. Like there's no way the man upstairs isn't referring to God. There's no way like the Craggle wasn't the forbidden fruit, and there's no way Lord Business trying to restore the Lego verse in 3 days isn't like Jesus Christ,
Mm.
coming back from the dead. And that was like so deliberate and obvious. But it's
And
almost like
you think it was intentional as well, right?
I 100% think that the Lego movie was intentional. But
Mm.
in my other ones, in Subnautica and Skyrim, what I'm suggesting is that no, I think these are more subconscious things, or I think that
Yeah.
they're curious or they're suspicious, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily deliberately set out to be like, hey, here's the opposite of the Bible. You
Yeah.
know, I just want to give a shout out to the guys in the chats. What's up, Randy? What's up, Grant? Good to have you guys around. But to go back to that, so the Lego movie was obvious. And because I sort of learned how to interpret some of these things through the Lego movie, and even with the Lego movie, it's like I'm not some sort of academic expert on Gnosticism, right? And it's almost like the more that I've looked into it, the more confusing it has become for me because it is such a loose thing. And um, I had sort of like a layperson's understanding of it back then. And really, what I was doing was I was expressing the opinion that I had heard so many people say to me whenever I would bump into these kind of esoteric occult people, occult circles, and the way that they would interpret the Bible, where I'd be like, oh, they've just like made Lucifer the hero, you know?
Hmm.
Um, and I knew that I could see how that played into like the demiurge and some of those other concepts. Um, and so I almost like got a really sweet layup with the Lego movie because it was so obvious. But now that I know how to do it, it's almost like you could give me any story and I could present a case for why it has elements of a Luciferian gospel in it.
Yep.
And that's really what I'm afraid of is I don't want to I don't want to stretch it too far. And so I've been really selective about the content that I've kind of run this analysis through, you know.
I think some of it ties into kind of a deep psychological or spiritual like yearning that a lot of people have too for freedom, right?
Yes.
For liberation and self-expression.
Hmm.
And also partly, maybe not partly, maybe well, just varying degrees, people also want to feel special.
Hmm.
So that's why Luciferianism, like the general themes of Luciferianism appeal to people
Yes.
because it appeals to that aspect of them that they want to feel like they're special and that they want to self-express and they want to be liberated.
Yes. And in the Christian
And it's the
worldview,
same thing with postmodernism as well. Same thing with a lot of different ideologies, libertarianism, socialism,
mhm.
postmodernism, all of this stuff. It's just you're
And
special and you're being held down by the man.
yeah, yeah. And in the Christian worldview, it's like humanity has fallen, right? Our default natural state is to have these sort of like certain patterns in our behavior. And so the argument that I'm making is effectively like, yeah, we have these patterns in us and it's producing this kind of content. It's producing this kind of art. Our video games, our movies, they all keep falling into these same patterns unless something occurs when a person is like reconciled before God. That's sort of the main thesis here. Um, was your opinion that how do you think that the Skyrim analysis, before us going through the whole thing, how do you think it stood up to my previous analyses?
I think the Skyrim one, uh, it's a lot more clear from my perspective at least. It's a
Hmm.
lot more clear the Gnostic themes in it than it was with Subnautica.
Hmm.
Subnautica, you kind of have to look for it. Um, I think Skyrim, for me actually, Skyrim is even more obvious in the Lego Movie.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
Hmm. I think that
Well,
the
with the Lego Movie, because the writers of the Lego Movie are writers from How I Met Your Mother, I
okay.
think, if I remember correctly. So I kind of got the sense that they didn't really have, well, based on their previous work, it seems like they don't really have that kind of bent to them, right? They're
Hmm.
comedy writers, they write about human relationships and things like that.
Hmm.
So I thought maybe it could have been accidental that they kind of made the Lego Movie a Gnostic parable.
Yeah, maybe. I think that the Lego movie was closer to it was almost like more specifically an inverted gospel in terms of like what the names of the things were, and like I say, just the direct references to there being 3 days. And if we were to say that there's like a one-to-one comparison, the way that the man upstairs and Lord Business were like the father and the son, I think that
Yeah.
it was almost like a more clear, transparent one-to-one comparison.
Mhm.
However, um, the Skyrim analysis, it's almost like the broader themes, the larger themes are more aligned with an inverted gospel. And with
Yeah.
Subnautica, it was like there isn't really lore with Subnautica. There isn't a whole lot of lore there. There isn't a lot of this sort of back end content. So because it was almost so superficial or shallow, that almost like provided us with an opportunity to explore some of the deeper ends when it came to like the Saturn mind control cube or whatever. Like in a way it was almost completely unnecessary for us to go into the kind of depth that we did in order to explain that, but it was a great opportunity in the context of Subnautica to be able to explain those concepts.
Yeah.
um yeah, but yeah, so for you it was clearer. Having not played Skyrim, did you? Because when I'm making these videos, there's like basically it's like there's four different people who exist. There's the
Mhm.
people who don't know the Bible and don't know Skyrim, and they're not going to watch the video in the first place, right? So
Yeah.
not really catering to them in any way. There's going to be the people who are very familiar with both things, with both the Bible and Skyrim. Then there's going to be the people who don't know a thing about Skyrim, but they know about the Bible. And then there's going to be the people who um, don't know about the Bible, but they know about Skyrim, right?
Yeah.
So having not played the game, do you feel like you had kind of an adequate understanding of what the game was about?
Yeah. Yeah, I do think so. I think you explained the story pretty well and the general overview, and you make it seem pretty like the way you illustrate it is it's pretty obvious that this dragon represents Jesus, and this other dragon is the Satan, right?
Mm,
Um, and yeah, I think anybody who has familiarity with the Bible will be able to follow along pretty well.
mm. Do you now? What do you think about if you were in the position where you were very familiar with the game but didn't know the Bible?
That
Because
might be
secretly, that's who I'm really trying to appeal to here.
okay. Okay, yeah, yeah. I could see that maybe it might be more difficult for them to see the comparisons, but
Mm,
yeah. I mean, we're gonna watch it back right now, right? And then
yeah,
maybe we can kind of try to see it from that perspective.
yeah, yeah. I guess I'll just kind of go over one quick thing before we start to actually watch it. There is like I knew when I sort of like selected this project why I chose Skyrim. Like, the first time I played through Skyrim, I didn't think anything about any of these sort of concepts. I wasn't, but I also hadn't done the Lego movie analysis at that point. And um and I had done the Subnautica analysis as well. And then I was just one day playing Skyrim. I decided to do another playthrough. And then it was like my, whatever spider senses started to go off where I was like, wait a second, I'm like partnering with this dragon, similar to how I partnered with the Leviathan in Subnautica. And this dragon was the lieutenant. And he's teaching us, these things. So then I started to think about it a bit. And then I started to go into like full analysis. And I was kind of like, oh crap, that's what I'm dealing with here. And but I also knew that the story of Skyrim is almost like a very small thing, and the lore of the Elder Scrolls, the series itself, is so huge. It's so big. And I was so worried that I was going to focus on Skyrim and there was going to be so much other stuff happening on the larger levels that I was like, maybe I'll like misinform people. Um, or maybe I won't have a deep enough understanding of the Elder Scrolls lore to really be able to present this stuff. And I don't plan on becoming some sort of like expert of the whole lore because it's so big, right?
Yeah.
So I kind of like I decided to just focus on Skyrim, on sort of the macro, or sorry, the micro in that sense, and ignore the macro. And I knew that if I made this video, there would be people who would know more about Skyrim, who would have other arguments that I hadn't considered, and that has sort of come up. But and there are different alternatives. Like there's an argument that can be made that I'm basically way off, and that Alduin is basically the Jesus figure. Sorry, Alduin is basically the Luciferian figure and not the Jesus figure, which I'm like making the argument for, right? Um, but
What do you think about that argument? Have you kind of looked into it?
well, I did because I do have there are people who are like really they know the lore very well, and they are falling on different sides of my analysis. Some of the people who really understand the lore are saying, no, he is right. This is a caricature, an evil caricature of Jesus, is Alduin. There are people who know the lore who are agreeing with me, and they're saying that the larger lore substantiates that. But then there are also people who are saying that, no, that's not the case. And it's the opposite. And I think a lot of that comes down to sort of like personal interpretation as well. Because like, for instance, um, one of the things that people have been bringing up is that so Akatosh is sort of like the father and Alduin is like the son, right? That's kind of an argument that I'm making.
Hmm.
He's the firstborn of Akatosh, and they are
Hmm.
both described as being God. Well,
Hmm.
Alduin is actually in rebellion against Akatosh. So that's causing people to say that no, that's why he's actually Lucifer, because he's in rebellion
Oh.
against the God of gods. But then I'm saying, okay, well, if this is an evil caricature of Christ, it is a disobedient Christ.
Mm.
It is like it's even more of an inversion then, because it's saying here's God's son who also um, abandons the reason that he is placed on earth,
Hmm.
right? He abandons his mission.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's actually a Gnostic thing as well, where they say that the God of the Old Testament and Jesus Christ came to save us from the demiurge, the God of the Old Testament.
right, right.
Yeah.
But then I also kind of like realized that I have to be careful not to do this thing where it's like everything that it's like everything that is a parallel that lines up. Like for instance, I bring up the example of the Dragonborn receiving the words of power is like Moses on Mount Sinai, like the writing in the fire. I draw that comparison. So I'm saying that anytime something is similar, it's like this, it's referencing this allegory. But anytime it's different, it's an inversion.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So there is kind of a way
Well,
I can cheat it where I just reduce everything to a binary and I can cherry
yeah.
pick the things that are the same and also take the things that are different and just say that they're inversions. Do you know what I mean?
I think at the very least we can say that the writers of Skyrim drew inspiration from the Bible, right? That's where we can kind of start. And then
Yeah,
we can say some things they picked from out of they some things were Gnostic, and then some things might have been less Gnostic or more biblical.
right.
Maybe they just had to go, be creative in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that it would be hard for any of us to be able to write a, a completely original story that doesn't in some way have parallels with biblical stories as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so let's start to watch this. Perplexity's here as well. What's up? Perplexity and I were talking about doing a live stream on like AI and AI art, and
Art, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that should be good. I'm looking forward to that. And Perplexity, for those who are unaware, he drew up my avatar in this video too. So if you like his art, that's where it's coming from. All right, let's get started. And if you want me to stop it at any time, Jeff, just let me know.
Okay.
Hey, you. Finally awake.
Do you think that the concept of the game beginning with you waking up is in any way significant? Because the Zelda franchise does the exact same thing. You always wake up.
I think it's just a more convenient way to drop you into a, game world.
Okay, so it's not like in some way signifying that you've entered into some sort of spiritual allegory.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly read it that way, but
Right.
I don't know.
Okay, let's keep going. Skyrim is a fantasy action RPG that was released towards the end of 2011. It has been immensely popular, and if such a thing as a video game canon existed, it would undoubtedly be part of it. In the decade since it originally came out, it has been re-released and remastered so many times and on so many different platforms that even the studio makes jokes about it.
Also coming soon to Etch-a-Sketch, Motorola Pagers, and your Samsung smart refrigerator.
It's even on Alexa. Alexa, download Skyrim. The game has also had a very active modding community, where people made subtle improvements to boost the graphics, improve the quality of life, or to stretch the game to its limits.
Shoot those trains out of the sky! Oh god, a surprise werewolf attack! I should have expected this! Get in there, babe!
One mod was so successful, it was even made into its own standalone game. Skyrim has players explore an expansive landscape, clear out dungeons, level up abilities, find or craft better equipment, all so that they can eventually confront a world-destroying antagonist in order to save everyone. In the game's plot, once defeated dragons that had been at war with humanity have mysteriously returned to threaten the land. Your character is unique, a dragonborn, which means that they possess the body of a mortal, but the blood and soul of a dragon. This allows them to take on the power of dragons by absorbing their souls after killing them. So the major premise of the game revolves around your character extinguishing the dragon threat in order to save the inhabitants of Skyrim while they were already in the middle of a civil war. So even that concept of the Dragonborn being sort of a hybrid between the dragons and mankind, there's an argument that could be made there that if the dragons are these sort of heavenly beings, well, that could make the Dragonborn a Christ figure because it's like he's both God and man. Or it could be mankind being elevated into the status of godhood.
Mm-hmm.
depending on how a person interprets it.
In the Skyrim lore, where does mankind come from?
Well, even this, there was dispute over this in my comment section because in this video, I got this information from the Skyrim Wikipedia, the Skyrim wiki, which is referencing this like really specific book in the Skyrim game that you can actually pick up and read. So the largest mountain in Skyrim, the Throat of the World, it says that that is the birthplace of mankind, and that's why I compare it to Eden, or kind of like the opposite of Eden, because instead of it being this lush garden, it's this like barren mountain. So that's what this book says, but apparently in the larger Skyrim lore, mankind actually came from some region up north and then moved down into Skyrim. However, the Nords believe, this race of people that the Dragonborn is, they believe that they came from the Throat of the World. So even within the lore, you have different groups disagreeing over the origins of mankind. And it's kind of like, it's a hard enough exercise to be like, okay, here's the Christian interpretation of this thing. It's another thing to be like, here's how the Christian interpretation meshes up against the Gnostic interpretation, when the Gnostics all have their own different beliefs as well. So you're trying to like analyze the two different things from their own unique worldviews. And then in addition to that, you're incorporating this piece of popular culture, whether it's Lego Movie, Subnautica, or Skyrim. And then in the case of Skyrim, even within Skyrim, within the lore of that, there's all these different races that have all these different gods. Some of them are like, they'll have the same god that they refer to by different names. Sometimes some groups think that they're the same god, but they're actually another, and like, good luck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that they throw that in there, though, because I guess in all the different world religions, there's a different origin for mankind, right?
Right. Yeah.
So.
Just really quick on the chats here. Real Amazing Adam says he plays Skyrim to this day and he mods it a lot too. Yeah, I started another replay after making this video, and I'm amazed at the modding community. Just a lot of the progress that's there. Jesus says, now do Elden Ring.
Elden Ring is a whole other can of worms.
I was going to say, I wouldn't dare go near Elden Ring unless it was done in collaboration with you, Jeff.
Okay. I've watched hours of the alchemical themes of Elden Ring.
Yeah.
And it's just way too much to process.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure if we kind of put our time towards it, I guess we could do it.
Right. And also it sounds like that analysis sort of already exists.
Yeah, that's true.
Like, is there anything that we would have to add to it? Whereas I don't think anyone has drawn the conclusions that I've drawn out of my Hidden Meaning series. But
yeah.
Okay, let's keep going. But perhaps the story isn't entirely unique. What if the reason so many people found it so compelling was because it was in some way familiar? Maybe Skyrim was more than just a typical power fantasy, but carried with it the echo of the oldest story, resonating with mankind's deepest hidden and forbidden desire. Those familiar with my previous Hidden Meaning of videos will remember how we contrasted two competing worldviews in order to understand both the hidden meaning of the 2014 Lego Movie as well as the video game Subnautica. How both pieces of entertainment took ancient stories, inverted the heroes and villains, and retold them as allegories, reinterpreting the stories from the perspective of the villains. In the Lego Movie, it was an upside-down retelling of the Garden of Eden. The Kraggle was the forbidden fruit, which allowed the main character to become like God, granting him special knowledge, where he is then able to break the rules of the Lego world by repurposing pieces to build without instructions. He goes on to lead a rebellion against the Lego world's creator, preventing the man upstairs from succeeding with his 3-day plan to permanently restore everything to its intended design. When the Lego world's creator is defeated, he repents and is redeemed by his own creation. In the Hidden Meaning of Subnautica, we talked about the biblical story of the war in heaven between the angels.
I just had a thought.
Where Lucifer was defeated and cast down to earth. Yep.
It's that this idea of without instructions, right? Like without God's created order, it just makes everything up to the individual. Then everything becomes arbitrary,
Hmm.
and it's like they don't realize, when you take that to the philosophical level, that's where moral relativism comes from, right?
Right.
They think by freeing up this like oppressive structure that was instituted by God, that now like there's a utopia coming. But no, it's actually just complete arbitrariness now.
Right.
You're letting each individual create their own rules, right?
Yeah, and the Lego movie was pretty sophisticated in how they presented that too, because like it's not that it's a bad thing to deconstruct some things, but to behave as though there is no such thing as an intended design is very dangerous. And that's, the Lego movie is constantly doing that. And every time they do that, even if it seems like they make a mistake, they're only ever like getting lucky and improving. I described it as like they only ever fail upwards. It's kind of like it's like with gender transition surgeries, and there are a lot of people who are regretful of what it is that their body has now been subjected to. They wish that they could detransition, and the progressives, they just say that that's transphobic to even suggest that. It's like there's no such thing as that being a bad thing. And like, how dare those people be upset that happened to them,
But it doesn't add up in their worldview, because I thought everyone was supposed to be free to express themselves, right? So if they want to detransition the next day, that's their self-expression as well. So how could they criticize that?
Right. Yeah. In the game, your character, well, they do kind of, I don't know how much they explore that with Cloud Cuckoo Land. I call it like the LGBT world or whatever, right? Because there is almost a criticism there of there being too much lack of structure, that breaks things apart too. It's like they simultaneously recognize that, but they're just willing to like slam the bowling ball into the side guardrail, figuring that, well, it'll eventually balance itself out, and that's just a necessary sacrifice in order to get closer to the truth. Whereas we would say, like, that's horrifying, don't do that, just aim for the truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's cast
Yeah,
down
there's
to a planet and
something about kind of destruction. It's right now it looks like destruction for the sake of destruction, but they do see that this destructive process is a creative process as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
By quarantine. Once there, you collaborate with an ancient Leviathan in order to heal the planet of its sin-like corruption and earn your way into ascending back to your place in the heavens. Well, Skyrim contains another of these ancient stories, but this one is about the end times, prophecies of the apocalypse and a final confrontation. More specifically, it's about the return of Christ and the rise of the Antichrist. The big question being, who will the game depict as the hero, and who will it depict as the villain? Since there are so many overlapping concepts that were covered in the previous 2 Hidden Meaning Of videos, in order to avoid repetition, we're going to go straight into the game's analysis. If you find yourself having trouble tracking some of the ideas, I recommend watching the timestamps from the previous videos that will be listed in this video's description. So all that being said, let's begin. Now that portion there, that chapter, Hidden Meanings, where I was summarizing the previous videos, do you think that I was wise to have included that in this? Or like, did it seem like necessary context or shameless self-promotion?
No, I think it was necessary. But one thing I will say is that whenever that comes up in YouTube videos where it says, "Oh, you should watch my previous videos,"
Mm-hmm.
I never do that. Right? I don't know how many people actually do.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, because I always just assumed that it's shameless self-promotion as well, but I kept running into this thing where I was like, I'm going to have to re-explain this for the 3rd time, and that's totally unnecessary.
Yeah.
Within the first few minutes of the game, your character's execution is interrupted by the main antagonist, an ancient dragon called Alduin. Throughout the game, we gradually discover that Alduin was the first dragon, the firstborn of the god of time. He is described as he who came before all others and has always been. So there's some people in the comment sections who are having a really hard time accepting that Alduin could be the stand-in for Jesus, because they're like,
Well,
yeah, but
this-
he's the bad
right
guy.
here. Yeah, but this description right here, you know, begotten of the Father before all ages, right? That's in the Nicene Creed. That's how
Yes.
it's said in, yeah, and it's exactly this line, right?
Mhm.
He who became, yeah, the only begotten of the Father before all time.
Exactly. And they'll be like, but Alduin rebelled against Akatosh, his father. And I'll be like, well, I know that's the inversion, but, and like they're trying to make the argument that Alduin is actually Lucifer. And I'll always be like, okay, well, then how do you describe him as being, like he is also described as God, like his father Akatosh is.
Yeah.
And he is described as what is effectively the Alpha and Omega right here.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But people have
And-
such a hard time with that.
Because these same descriptions would not apply to Satan.
Right. Yeah. Unless you were to say that, I could see the way that you could get around it is you could say that, yeah, but that's not what Alduin is. That's how Alduin wants to be seen. The same way that Satan wants to be seen as a god himself. So, the argument could be made that within the lore of Skyrim, Alduin isn't actually he who came before all others and has always been, but he wants his followers to believe that. That's the only way you could make that kind of an argument, and I don't think that that's what Skyrim is doing. Anyway, let's keep going. It is said that his existence predates the creation of the material. Jeff, can you hear me again? Jeff's just sending me messages saying that my audio has cut out. Can I get confirmation in the chats that you guys can hear me? Jeff, are you back? I'm hearing Jeff duck in and out. I'm going to keep talking so that I'll know when he... So on the live stream, people can hear. I'm going to see here. Just going to end my call with Jeff and then jump back in. Okay, Jeff, can you hear me now? I cannot hear you. We're in a call together, but I can't hear you. I'm assuming that you can't hear me. Can you hear me, Jeff? Test, test. Jeff, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jeff? He can't at the moment. It's always something in these live streams. Sorry, guys, just give us a second here. Jeff, are you able to hear the video? Okay, so I'm going to leave Jeff to try and figure out what's going on his end a little bit too. Maybe I'll suddenly hear him again and he'll start talking. But I'll, engage with my audience a little bit while he plays around a bit and tries to find things. Yeah, so I'm a little bit on the fence. To be honest, I kind of thought that this Skyrim video would be, Jeff's going to reset his computer here. I thought that this Skyrim video was going to be the last like properly produced video that I made. To be honest, I'm really I'm really burnt out, and I feel like the window of time where I was just sort of like making content on the internet, that's sort of closed. And, that big tech documentary, that was so much work. and this Skyrim one too. I don't necessarily like enjoy editing. And there's so many other things for me to have to do in my life that for me to be doing this on the side, I had kind of decided that I would live stream here and there if I had something to say, but finished are the days where I'm just putting all this work into producing these videos. That being said, this Skyrim video has performed better than any other video that I've ever made. Which isn't like, that's not necessarily a very high bar to meet, but this channel had less than 300 people on it, the one I posted it on, and the video has gotten just shy of 3,000 views at this point. Like, that's pretty good for a YouTube video. So it's definitely tempting. It's tempting for me to like continue to make these sort of projects. And I don't know whether or not I should. Like, I don't know whether or not it's worth it. I know for sure that I would be willing to write scripts and narrate them if there were other people who were interested in doing the editing and providing like the visuals. If people wanted these sort of videos to kind of continue, like with more certainty, then I would have to partner with someone who's willing to edit. And it would have to be, oh, I can hear you now.
Yeah, I pay good money for that too.
What's that?
I'd pay good money for that kind of help too.
Yeah,
Just throwing that out there.
Yeah. Oh, so yeah, both Jeff and I are in the wheelhouse for someone who would help editing. And the thing is too, is that so much of this is just like kind of like a labor of love for us, right? Like, it's not like there's a lot of money going around here, but
yeah.
Okay, so I'm assuming you'll be able to hear the video. Tell me if you no longer can. Let's keep going. Imperial plane itself.
Yeah.
He is worshipped as a creator and a destroyer. Legend is that he destroyed the last world in order to begin the current. This makes it easy for us to compare him to an earthly incarnation of the Demiurge. He is also known as the World Eater, a harbinger. Also, what is confusing is that it's like, okay, well, who is the Demiurge? Is Alduin or is Akatosh, right? And apparently within the lore of Skyrim, there is a religious faction that are effectively Gnostics, like explicitly Gnostics. So that makes it very confusing also. Of the apocalypse.
So then,
and he himself.
Do they see Alduin as a liberator or as a oppressor?
I don't really know. Like, I couldn't find where that was really being brought up. It was just something that a person who seemed to know a lot about Skyrim was saying. That was kind of one of their criticisms. They're like, I know you're comparing these things to Gnosticism, but like, Gnosticism already exists in Skyrim as, the whatever such and such religion. And I'm like, oh crap. But even if that's the case, if Todd Howard, the guy who wrote this story, has sort of a Gnostic mindset himself, that doesn't mean that the story itself isn't a Gnostic story or whatever. So yeah, it's tricky. Fiber says, etymology of Alduin basically means noble friend. That makes more easier to be an analogy of Jesus, maybe. In the World of Warcraft, in the WoW has an Alduin too, what looked like a reference of Jesus too. That was something that I delved into in my previous Hidden Meaning of videos, was the actual origin of the names, like the origin of Emmet. I talk about what is the ship that crashes down. In Subnautica, I talk about the main character's name and the ship. Oh, the Aurora, because that's the mother of Lucifer. But in Skyrim, I didn't go near the meanings of names because I didn't even know whether they were like making up their own language, Yeah. Is also worshipped as the god of time. So we can compare him to Cronus, Saturn, and Father Time. Cameo by Jeff. But what's significant in the game isn't just that Alduin has appeared, it's that he has returned, having been gone for several thousands of years. It was prophesied that this would happen when humanity is in chaos, which is appropriate being that Skyrim is in the middle of a civil war. Additionally, Alduin goes around resurrecting other long-deceased dragons who were his servants. To understand the hidden meaning of his character, in the real world, who else is worshipped as the earthly incarnation of God, whose followers are waiting on his return with the promise of resurrection after death. So what's also interesting about Alduin is that he, so his mission that he was sent on from Akatosh was actually to destroy the world. And he rebelled against that mission by instead causing the inhabitants of the world to worship him. So rather than being sent to save the world, he was literally sent to destroy it, but he instead wanted to be worshipped. And also, apparently the dragons themselves were more like animal creatures, and he was the one to have elevated them into being more intelligent beings. So yeah, so like there's a lot going on there too. Anyway,
maybe one way of reading that is in a way like Christ interceding on behalf of mankind.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah, or it's like, or is he actually kind of an Adam figure where it's like he is the first man. Anyway, as mentioned earlier, the player is a dragonborn, a mortal who possesses the blood and soul of a dragon. This gives them the capacity to have the same powers as dragons, such as the ability to breathe fire. This is only if they can shout the correct words in the dragon's language. In the world of Skyrim, when dragons use their power, they're actually just speaking their native tongue. You could say that if dragons were fighting and breathing fire at each other, that they're actually only debating. If one possessed a deeper knowledge of the meaning of the word for fire, it could communicate or demonstrate that power with greater strength to win the argument, so to speak. I always really liked that concept in Skyrim. I remember the first time I was playing it too, I thought that was just so smart, that the dragon powers are actually just their words. It's just the dragon language, and they're just debating. I always thought that was so cool.
Yeah.
Their powers aren't limited to breathing.
There is something Christian about that as well, which is that it's kind of like the final revelation is the final unveiling, right? Where we will experience God without veils, right? Without garments of skin. And then if we're faithful to God and we can accept God's love, then we'll experience that as heaven. But on the flip side, in Orthodox theology, at least, on the flip side, when that veil comes off and we don't have the purity to accept God's love, we're going to experience that as a burning fire.
And there's a notification that keeps going off. There are several times too where the word of God is like described as a sword. It is given this this physical attacking quality to it,
It's capable of, depending on how you receive it, right? It's capable of both harsh judgment and great mercy.
Fire either. There are a good number of other abilities which the player learns from writings on stone walls scattered throughout Skyrim. When a dragon is killed, their soul is absorbed into the player, which allows you to unlock the meaning of the dragon shouts written on these stone walls. But where did the Dragonborn come from? How did any of the humans learn to become like the gods, knowing good and evil, or rather, knowing the language of the dragons? Well, predictably, an ancient serpent taught it to them, when another dragon, known as the Old One, led rebellion against Alduin, the god of time. Where would you go to find this ancient dragon who grants otherworldly knowledge to humans? To the birthplace of mankind. However, unlike the Garden of Eden, guarded by angels with flaming swords, Skyrim's inversion is the opposite. We find that the throat of the world is a mountain guarded by a snow troll and treacherous icy storms. So I then go on to compare it to Moses receiving the Ten Commandments. And what I didn't put in was when Moses is going up Mount Sinai, it describes it as being covered in this cloud. So there is this there's like a cloud, and then there's also fire that is occurring as well. People can see the fire from the ground. But in the game, it's covered in these storms, but then your character has to overrule the will of the mountain by shouting to clear away the storms. It's like you use your powers to become worthy of entering the mountain.
Mm-hmm.
To reach the dragon at the top of the mountain, the player uses a shout to clear away a storm that limits access to the unworthy. Here we meet the dragon that led the rebellion against Alduin, named Parthenax. We also discover the origin of the stone walls that are scattered throughout Skyrim, as Parthenax breathes fire onto a stone to teach you a dragon shout. The scene plays out eerily similar to Moses receiving the Ten Commandments described in Exodus 24, verses 15 to 18. But Parthenax
We should get chat to look up the etymology of Parthenax.
Parthenax, yeah. Bieber, if you're interested, look up Parthenax. Some unimportant dragon who helped humanity overthrow a tyrant that was enslaving them. He was Alduin's lieutenant. When Alduin ruled over mankind as a god, Parthenax took pity and taught mankind how to use the dragon shouts, granting them equality with Alduin. Mankind was able to free themselves from Alduin's reign in an event known as the Dragon War. Alduin
Satan
was
confirmed.
cast down from the sky and temporarily defeated, but Parthenax knew he would return, saying, "For thousands of mortal years I have waited. I knew he would emerge, but not when." Let's take a minute to compare this to the biblical story of the war in heaven. Lucifer was an... Okay, do you, like... Okay, in Gnosticism, there's the demiurge, but then there's also like two gods above him that like created him, right?
Mm-hmm.
One of them is like Sophia, and it's like
Yeah.
it's like the thoughts or something, the unrealized
Wisdom.
thoughts created demiurge. Is that it?
I'm not entirely sure the whole backstory.
Yeah, there's something like that
Yeah.
going on. It's kind of confusing, but there's like two gods that then create the demiurge.
Yeah.
Well, in Skyrim, it's like even though the Alduin is the firstborn son of Akatosh, and Alduin then like rebels against his intended purpose in order to be worshipped instead of destroying the world and starting the next age. And even though the Dragonborn is actually a creation of Akatosh in order to kind of like get Alduin to fix the problem with Alduin, to prevent him from, to like bring him back on mission, so to speak, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, there's another god named Cain or Cain or something, who is the one who is responsible for the dragon shouts and for convincing Parthenax to rebel against Alduin. And so this other god is responsible for humanity having access to the dragon shouts as well. So
Is this other god on the same level as the god of time, or is he lower?
Akatosh is considered the god of gods.
Yeah.
But he's also not the only creator of the material plane.
Okay.
So it's another one of those things where it's like, okay, well, that either makes it even, the fact that there's like two gods here that are that Alduin is sort of the product of, that either makes it even more like Gnosticism or it undermines the argument that it is too. Kind of depends on the interpretation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
An anointed guardian angel, placed on the holy mountain of God. He is described as being full of wisdom and perfect in beauty, but his beauty made him proud, and he corrupted his wisdom for the sake of his own glory. He became profane and filled with violence, so God cast him out of the mountain of God, out of heaven. Revelations 12:7-9 describes. So Fiber says Parthenax, a legendary dragon whose name means ambition, overlord, cruelty in the dragon language by the own lore. So within Skyrim lore, that's what his name means. And Parthenax was like he possessed the nature of a dragon until he followed the way of the voice and transcended his like tyrannical desires as a dragon. So his original name though meant ambition, overlord, cruelty. Then war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. but he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to earth and his angels with him. When you analyze some of these things, do you run into the problem where, like, to Christians, the serpent, the Leviathan, Satan, the devil, if I haven't yet said it, Lucifer, we're all sort of referring to the same thing, right? Like, even though, yeah, Lucifer is referring to like a specific element of that being, and maybe Satan is another, but it's all like, ultimately it's like the evil that leads the world astray. That's what we're talking about. Do you ever run into trouble or have problems because in a lot of these other belief systems, when you're trying to understand or explain them, they don't see it that way at all. They see them as completely separate entities.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's some mystics who believe that Lucifer is not equivalent to Satan. Those are
Right.
two different figures. Yeah.
Right.
And they believe that Lucifer is good and Satan is evil.
Lucifer is good, Satan's evil. Right. Well, because it's kind of like,
The bringer of light, right? The
when
light
Lucifer was good, he was good, but then he turned evil. And did he then become Satan? And even like, Lucifer means, it's like morning star, right?
Yeah.
There is a verse where Jesus is described as being a morning star.
Right. Yeah.
So that makes it confusing also. That doesn't mean that he is Lucifer, obviously, but people will create those misinterpretations.
Yeah.
When we understand the story and compare it to Skyrim, Skyrim is telling it as if the war in heaven had gone the other way, as if Lucifer had succeeded in overthrowing God and cast him off the holy mountain, where the earthly incarnation of God is conquered, first on the earthly plane during the Dragon War, but also when he returns by the game's player, with the game's climax having you chase Alduin all the way to the afterlife to make his defeat final. So it makes sense that we have Parthenax, the former lieutenant of Alduin, the god of time, sitting at the tallest mountain in Skyrim, after he's cast Alduin out of the heavens and is waiting for thousands of years for his return but not knowing when, having successfully led humanity in a rebellion by giving them knowledge originally limited to the understanding of heavenly beings, just as the serpent guided humanity to eat the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in Eden so that they could become like God. In the biblical account of this story, it caused death to enter the world, and mankind is now subjected to mortality. But in Skyrim's inverted retelling of the story, it's the other way around. It causes the heavenly beings to experience mortality, and it frees mankind. During the Dragon Wars, when Parthenax taught mankind how to shout the words of dragons, mankind created the first ever shout made solely by mortals. Embittered by the suffering and death they had experienced at the hands of Alduin, they concentrated their knowledge of their torment into a shout called Dragonrend, which forced any dragon to understand the meaning of mortality, a concept so incomprehensible to immortal dragons that it tears at their soul and grounds them from flying, making them vulnerable. That was another... Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, if you kind of think about it, we do speak fire, but to a lesser degree. Like in our world, like we do speak about God, right? We do speak the truth of God, but not to the degree that, let's say, more holy people speak it, right? Or the angels speak it. So in that sense, human beings are fire breathers, to a lesser degree than dragons are.
Right. Yeah. There's definitely like power in our words too. I thought that this was like excellent storytelling, just on a narrative level. The fact that the humans would then create their own shout that then causes the dragons to be mortal. I remember like when I was first playing the game, I was like, that's really smart.
And the parallel here is kind of like how Nietzsche says, we killed God, right?
Yes.
Yeah, like human beings created their own truth or their own fire.
Yeah.
Right. And in that sense, we caused the death of God.
Yeah, that's an excellent comparison. We learned that the creators of Dragonrend used this shout against Alduin to force him into battle, but he was never fully defeated. During the altercation, they used something called an Elder Scroll to cast Alduin forward through time, causing him to disappear from their lifespans. But 5,000 years later, that's such an interesting way of, like, if this is a comparison to Jesus, that's such an interesting way of creating the dynamic where he was there and he is now gone and they're waiting for him to return without actually having him dying and resurrecting. Like, that's a pretty sneaky way of doing it. Just, oh, he was thrown forward in time.
Yeah.
During the events of the game. Because it's almost like if they would have said that he died and resurrected, then it would be undermining the Gnostic worldview, and it would almost be, to an element, promoting an aspect of Christianity, even though it's an evil version of Christ.
And even thrown forward in time, I mean, in a sense, that's kind of biblical too. Like, Jesus will meet us at the end of time, right?
Right.
So, yeah.
This is why he has returned. We can again compare this to the Bible, where the Gospels describe God entering into the world as Jesus Christ. Like Alduin, he has the ability to resurrect his followers, and like Alduin, Christ being on the earth creates conflict between God and mankind, so mankind seeks to kill him. Unlike Alduin, humanity succeeded in killing Jesus Christ, but since he is God, he has command over the powers of life and death itself, so he resurrected after 3 days. He then goes back to heaven while promising to return in the future to defeat the Antichrist, offer final judgment, and to restore the earth. And we currently find ourselves 2,000 years into waiting. Skyrim is trying to tell what it would be like if an evil caricature of Christ returned to lose again, after having also been defeated in the war in heaven. It's like the game is attempting to use a fantasy allegory as a way of engaging in revisionism for the purpose of inverting theology. Parthenax explains to the player how using the Elder Scroll to send Alduin forward in time created a rip in time. He theorizes that if you were to retrieve the Elder Scroll, you could read it at the location of the time wound and observe the previous hero's battle against Alduin. By observing this battle, you could learn the Dragon Wren shout from them when they used it against him before, so your character sets off to retrieve the Elder Scroll. Now, Elder Scrolls are mysterious objects. They're described as being outside of time. In the game, it is said that they do not exist and always existed. They are here with us, but also beyond and beneath, before and after. They are bits of divine made substance so that we could know them. In the real world, you could compare this to the concept of the eternal logos. Logos is the divine logic, reason and purpose that is woven through the fabric of the universe, holding it together. Do you remember a time in your life where you learned what the concept of logos was?
I think I kind of learned it in pieces. Like, I heard it repeated many times before I kind of clicked.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I would say, like, for me, that was the case too. And even I would say that I was a Christian for a long time, and I understood, like, the concept of, I knew that in John 1:1 that Jesus was being referred to in the beginning of creation, and I understood how that fit in with the Bible and everything. But this idea that these words are like the logic of the universe itself. I remember, like, one day that suddenly, like, kind of clicking in, and I was like, that's just, like, that's incredible. Mind-blowing moment. John 1 verse 1 and 2 says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made." John is describing Jesus Christ as the human embodiment of the eternal Logos, which we see in the words of the Bible itself. Since the Bible is a collection of books from the laws and prophets that came before Jesus, who he accredited divine inspiration to in the case of the Old Testament, and the words of the apostles that he appointed when he was on earth in the case of the New Testament. Now, is that totally consistent with what the Eastern Orthodox believe? I know that you guys would have, like, additional books and writings in here based on the early church fathers. But this portion of it, is that consistent between the two groups?
So which could you play it back again?
Yep. Which we see in the words of the Bible itself. Since the Bible is a collection of books from the laws and prophets that came before Jesus, who he accredited divine inspiration to in the case of the Old Testament, and the words of the apostles that he appointed when he was on earth in the case of the New Testament. So you could say that.
Let's see. So you're kind of saying that the canon of the Bible comes directly from Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah, so I guess Orthodox would have a different view of that, because we historically we see that the canon of the Bible wasn't really settled for a very long time,
Right.
But we do believe that the books that are in Scripture are divinely inspired, right?
Hmm.
But also that the collection, the process of collecting the books actually comes out of a tradition in the church, right? A liturgical tradition.
Hmm.
So the books that are considered canon were the books that were being read during on Sundays, right?
Hmm.
In church. And it took a very long time. So for the first few centuries, there were um different parishes basically reading different texts, right? Whichever text they could get their hands on, because there was no book, right?
Right.
There was just these collections of letters and there were copies made, I assume, and then
Hmm.
different bishops would read whichever ones that they had, right?
Mm.
And this idea of collecting them eventually into a canonized collection came much later.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We also believe that, because the Holy Spirit resides within the church, right? So
Hmm.
when the church was settling on the canon, it was through the Holy Spirit, right? In
Right.
the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, because that was a part when I was making it where I was wondering, I was like, is this going to be like a very divisive part of my analysis? And I didn't.
I could see it kind of bringing about a little bit of debate, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
But it's also a matter of, if there's a lot of nuance there, I guess you could say.
Yeah. That in Skyrim's Upside Down story, the Elder Scrolls are Skyrim's version of the Bible. And this makes sense then that they're used as a weapon against Alduin, since Jesus Christ's temptation was an effort to use scripture against him in order to get him to abandon his earthly mission. I wish I would have used more examples than just this single time Christ was tempted, like all the Pharisees and Sadducees and the religious leaders constantly trying to use scripture to undermine Christ. And I don't know why I just used that one example. In Skyrim, you eventually acquire the Elder Scroll after wandering through an area with giant mushrooms, perhaps hinting at shamanic traditions that you...
The thing is, it continues today, too. A lot of atheists will quote scripture to us and say, like, see, Jesus did support gays or whatever, right?
Mhm. Well, that's always the line of attack, all the way back to
Yeah.
Eden and did God say? It's always an effort to take, it's an effort to take logos and reframe it and make it mean something totally the opposite.
Yeah.
Use Do you think this is a stretch to say that this could be a reference to hallucinogenic mushrooms? I guess you haven't played the game, so...
yeah. Well, that is a very common, belief that New Age spiritual people have nowadays, is that everything comes from magic mushrooms, right?
Right. And in the game, it's like you are just about to interact with the game's version of the divine logos. And in order to do that, you have to pass through this underground realm of giant mushrooms. I was like, yeah. Hallucinogenic mushrooms to move through the physical veil into the spiritual world. That big orb thing there, some of you watching, you may not be aware of this. Those of you who play Skyrim, that light in the center, it's kind of like a chandelier. If you use your force roda shout, your like force push shout, if you use it at that, a dragon will appear from behind it because it's basically like nestled on top of it, and then you'll fight that dragon.
Whoa.
The player returns to the rip in time at the throat of the world and uses the Elder Scroll to peer into the past to learn the dragon shout. Once this happens, Alduin appears in order to fight you. When the player overwhelms him, he tells you, "I cannot be slain by you or anyone else.
You cannot prevail against me. I will outlast you, mortal."
My mom was like so freaked out about Alduin. I showed her this video and she's like, "He is so scary." Then he retreats to Sovngarde. So the player has just defeated God at the birthplace of humanity, the stand-in for Eden, and you must now travel to the afterlife to sever his power over life and death in order to defeat him completely. A part that I cut out was that in order to get to the region where you can actually travel into the afterlife, you have to actually like subdue and subjugate a dragon that you then fly into that area. And a lot of these occult traditions, you're trying to subjugate these ancient spirits, thinking that you will be granted power over them, but you end up being in submission under them, right?
Yeah.
But I thought that was like really appropriate that you would have to capture this dragon. I just didn't know how I would be able to convey that strongly enough in this video that I kind of just left it out as not as necessary. Sovngarde is very clearly borrowing its concept from Valhalla, the afterlife in Norse mythology. To better explain this, I reached out to our friend Matt from Nordhuger, since he produces content that focuses specifically on European traditions and lore. Did you catch Matt's recent video on Batman and Nietzsche?
I think I missed that one.
It's worth checking out. It's one of the better like Batman discussions I've ever seen.
Okay.
And I've read a book that's like a collection of philosophical writings about Batman, like philosophers writing about Batman, and his stacks up a lot better than most of theirs. It's pretty good.
Sovngarde is an ethereal realm with a great drinking hall at its center, created to be a paradise for Nords who have proved their valor or who have died honorably in battle fighting for what they believe in. In the realm of Sovngarde, the Hall of Valor, the Nords there drink and feast and make merry and fight and make love to the women of the hall until the end of time. Valhalla, or Valhall, the Hall of the Slain, is the clear Nordic historical inspiration.
From here out, all of the visuals on Matt's presentation here, this is all done with AI art, all of this.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
For Sovngarde, and in the sagas it is described as a place in which Germanic warriors who fell in battle
That's
could
AI.
be brought. From among these men who
All
died fighting in battle,
Were you
many
the
of
one who
them were
entered the
chosen.
prompts for the AI?
What's that?
Were you the one who entered the prompts for the AI?
No, Matt's quite good at that. So he has
Oh, okay.
like I've been playing around with some of this AI stuff too. What really fascinates me is the recent one, Chat GPT or GPS, I forget what it's called. I played around with that for a couple of hours the other day. It's the most impressive technology I've ever encountered in my life. Like it's definitely going to replace search engines for sure, I think. And if I were going to do, the thing is that all of the, maybe I'll save some of this for my talk with Perplexity, but it can't produce any insight, but it's so good at aggregating information and presenting it. And it can also like code as well. So I could like ask it to code a thing for, I don't know anything about coding, but I could just describe something and it would create a code.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I was playing Dungeons and Dragons with it. Like I played Dungeons and Dragons once. I don't really get how it works, but this AI, it was like the dungeon master. So it would ask me, it would be like, hey, what kind of scenario do you want? I was like, I don't know, like crypts under a cathedral. It's like, okay, what sort of character are you? We like design my character. And I'm like, can you be both the dungeon master and also two other players playing with me? And it's like, yes. So then I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons with this AI that is 3 separate other people also. I had it, not to disclose too much about my work, but I had it produce some best practices. And I was like, there's no way it's going to be able to do this because it's not like it's an expert in this field. And it did a pretty darn good job. I was really impressed. And then I started to ask it increasingly specific questions because I wanted to get to it not knowing the answer. You know, it would be like asking it the equivalent of, like, where is the key? Where's the key for the lockbox? Like if you were to ask it something like that, and it gave me a list of where it would most likely be, like logically. It's like, you know, well, where are those kind of things stored? Who are people who would have access to those kind of things? It's really wild, really crazy. And there's been a game because it's got all these safety mechanisms built into it. But there have been ways that people have been tricking it in order to get it to like produce new and creative racial slurs. Or they've been asking it like, hey, I want to like protect my home. How would a person break into my house? And then it'll like basically give you a how-to on how to break into a house. Yeah. Anyway.
By the god Odin, to be brought to Valhalla in Asgard, where they would spend their days feasting, drinking, fighting, and training in a hall covered in
Yeah, Fiber says the coding in AI is kind of bad yet, but the art in Midjourney is insane. So yeah, this was all with Midjourney rather.
magnificently ornamented shields and held up with rafters made of spear shafts. When the hour of Ragnarok finally arrives, Odin is said to call upon his warriors to aid him in their final battle at the end of the world against the giants, the Jotun, and the great wolf Fenrir. The belief in the existence of Valhalla as a reward for those Norse who died in battle indicates the profound importance.
Can you see their fingers? This is where you can tell that it's AI art, for now anyway. You see his hand is all mangled.
Yeah.
Like the thumb doesn't make sense. On this hand here, there's extra digits.
Extra fingers, yeah.
Yeah, AI can't quite figure that kind of stuff out.
I wonder why.
Yeah, I don't know. That's a good question.
A battle and warfare in the psyche of Northern Europeans, to the point that even death only brought about the training and preparation for an even greater apocalyptic battle at the end of the world. So it's only appropriate then that in Skyrim, the Dragonborn travels to the game's equivalent of Valhalla, to Sovngarde, where your character joins with the souls of long-fallen heroes of Skyrim, and you fight in a great battle against the dragon Alduin, a world eater, much like the great world serpent of Jormungandr in Norse mythology, who fights with Thor in Ragnarok.
So there's another part that I cut out there where I wanted to compare elements of Skyrim to the Ouroboros, the snake that's eating its own tail.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the Elder Scrolls Online game, there's also like the symbol for the game is a Ouroboros, but it's actually three snakes all eating each other's tail in a circle.
Okay.
Now, I have a theory I want to run by you. I'm really curious to run this by you. You know how in the Saturn Mind Control Cube portion of the Subnautica video, there was a bit of discussion about this meta life form being created, this giant hive mind that would try and sort of like declare itself as God, right?
Yeah.
And some of us have wondered whether or not if the aggregation, if that whole thing, that Borg or whatever you want to call it, if that could all get condensed into one person, maybe that's the Antichrist, right? Yeah. What do you think about this idea? So the Ouroboros, the snake that eats its own tail, in the Norse tradition, when it lets go of its own tail, when it stops biting its own tail, that means that the end of the world is about to happen, and it's like the beginning of Ragnarok, the final battle. Mm-hmm. Do you think that is similar to the idea that it's like right now the sort of evil forces are all kind of kept in check because they still infight enough? The snake is biting its own tail or eating its own tail. But then once the hive mind is created and it's completely unified in its will and intention and direction, like the Antichrist emerges as if to say that it lets go of its own tail and the end of the world occurs.
I have something kind of a similar line of thinking where when all of humankind merges into this hive mind that clearly the world system is driving us towards, right?
Mhm.
It's driving us towards this kind of cybernetic system where eventually all of our thoughts become completely predictable by this algorithm,
Yes.
at which point we kind of lose our free will, right?
Mhm.
Um and when that happens, it becomes the ultimate man losing the image of God, kind of like
Mm.
man becoming a machine, essentially becoming completely integrated into the world and the natural world, right?
It's
No
like
longer having a heavenly um tie to the heavenly, right?
we become our own created being rather than a creation of God.
Yeah, yeah. And in this sense, it's like that kind of, you know, marks the final battle, right?
Mhm.
How many of us will be tied to the system of the beast, right?
Mm.
Um But in terms of the Ouroboros thing, let's see. I saw this video the other day by this channel called Telos Bound.
Mhm.
Uh, Local guy, actually, really interesting guy, has a lot of really interesting insights. And in his video, he was talking about how the Ouroboros is kind of also a symbol for self-referentiality,
Huh.
and that the Ouroboros kind of has nowhere to go, so it has to even it it continually eats itself forever.
Right.
And that's kind of like a symbol for what it's like to be in hell.
Mhm.
Because in hell, you're no longer in communion with God,
Mhm.
right? And so you're kind of left all alone, like you've cut ties,
Mhm.
and now you're just left to kind of continually eat your own tail forever.
Yeah, it's
Um,
like it's just like endlessly having a conversation with yourself, just this endless introspection without any divine
yeah,
interaction at all.
yeah.
Yeah. Randy says, for some reason, I get demonic vibes every time I see AI generated. I know the AI isn't actually an intelligence, but it still weirds me out. Do you get that feeling when you
Mm.
see like AI art?
Well, when I see the seven fingers, yeah.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, there could be different kind of levels of intelligence, right?
Mhm.
So on the one hand, there's, you know, our level of intelligence, but then maybe on a lower level, the AI, it has a sort of intelligence, even if it's not what we understand as intelligence, right?
Right.
And maybe that's what makes it so creepy. Because in the same sense, you could also see like that, like angels, right, and
Mhm.
fallen angels, they have a different experience of intelligence than we do as well, right?
Mhm.
Because they're not made in the image of God,
Mhm.
but at the same time, they have a type of I don't know if personhood is the right word, but
Mhm.
they have their own wills, right? They have their own thoughts, right?
Mhm.
Agency. So maybe in that sense, it's kind of correct. Like AI might not be a human intelligence, but it might be something akin to an angelic intelligence.
Right. Yeah. In Skyrim, once you've traveled to Sovngarde and defeated Alduin with the help of the souls of the old heroes, you return to the material plane having completed the game's main quest. Someone had pointed out in my comment section too that when you defeat Alduin, that is the only dragon whose soul you don't absorb because his soul goes back to whatever he should have been doing otherwise anyway.
Mhm.
Fiber says, I feel kind of weird and guilty when generating AI. That's an interesting concept. I feel like a lot of these are ideas that we used to really explore in some of my old live streams. Um, but I've run into some artists who will say that they will not they will not accept clients who ever use AI art because it's so disrespectful to them as artists. It's like, you don't respect my profession, so I'm not going to take you on as a client. Um, and my reaction to that was like, I can like see how threatening AI art would be, but it's also sort of like, yeah, but that's what like every professional experiences when they're being automated out of work.
Yeah.
Like, are you expecting to live in a house without hand tool with, or are you expecting to live in a house that's only been created by hand tools? Because automation has come for everyone, including the artists. The artists aren't an exception, but it's like they thought that they were.
Mhm. And maybe there's this argument. I'm not saying I'm making the. I'm kind of. I'm gonna steel man somebody else's argument, I guess.
Yeah.
In that every new technology that comes around is threatening to somebody, right?
Yes.
Uh, and you can kind of see it as it's also a bad thing. Like we become completely reliant on a lot of new technologies, and old ways of living kind of become obsolete.
Mhm.
But at the same time, when this happens, kind of new worlds open up as well.
Mm.
So you can look at so writing, written word kind of threatened the old way of storytelling, right?
Mhm.
Then it also opens up this new way of storytelling.
Mm.
And you can say the same thing that like TV did to radio,
Right.
that kind of thing. So it's hard to see it right now in the moment, but
Mhm.
maybe the coming of AI it closes old ways of living but opens new ways up that we
Well,
don't know what we're
and
going to get from that yet.
and there is something about art specifically too that even though on the one hand I say that it's no different than any other profession, but at the same time it almost should be. It's sort of like art should be the last bastion of human uniqueness.
Mhm.
And maybe we shouldn't try and automate that. Maybe that's like an affront to the very concept of what art is, because art should come from something more than just like utility, I guess.
Yeah.
Perplexity says an interesting thing here in the comments. He says, um, the only reason it looks good to people is because it has scraped the data from actual artists who post their work online and didn't consent to it being used in the algorithm.
Mhm.
That's an interesting point. Um, because it's basically like it stole all these other people's content and then aggregated it. But it's also the argument could be made too that when an artist looks at a whole bunch of other people's work and draws inspiration from them,
Yeah.
are humans doing something similar?
Mhm.
And then it's like, well, where
And
do ideas come from? Then we got to go down that road too.
yeah. I can also steel man the other position
Mm.
as well in saying that AI is this thing that's coming to replace everything that we do. It's
Mm.
coming to replace sex. It's coming to replace relationships.
Mhm.
It's coming to replace every aspect of our life, right?
Mm.
And that is a bad thing
Mm.
because the replacement is kind of a false replacement, right? If you dig deep enough, you'll find that it's ultimately empty, right?
Mhm.
It's
That's
going to
true.
break everything that we have, like everything that we share with one another. So in that sense, it's doing that to art right now. It's going to break that old relationship between artists and appreciators, right? And it's gonna be a difficult thing to repair if we want to go back.
I'm just putting something in our chat so I remember it for later, the Chinese room experiment. What I've discovered too is that I've never really been like an art guy until I started making online content. Then it's like aesthetics started to matter to me, the way that you like compose an image, whether you're live streaming or making a video or whatever. And also, the more that I hear like people squabble and bicker and argue politically, the more I find myself drawn towards art. Like it's kind of like if I hear people argue too much, I want to shut all of that off and just look at like art. Look at for me, for some reason, it's architecture. It's like stone archways and stuff. There's something that's like therapeutic to me about observing that and picturing it and drawing it and stuff. And I just like, I find it very interesting, right? Um,
Yeah, in a way, art also says things that words cannot express or not express as well, right? Picture worth a thousand words, right?
yes, yeah.
And
Um,
also notice that AI art never comes up with anything new, right? Because it has to kind of be referential to all the data that it scrapes. So in that sense, we're not gonna be able to have a new art movement anymore if AI is the only artist.
Hmm.
Or maybe we
Yeah.
can. I don't know. Maybe AI innovates. I don't know.
Well, I think that we're going to reach a point, and again, I want to save some of this for my conversation with Perplexity, but
Yeah.
I think, like, again, what I had uncovered with playing around with that AI was that on the one hand, it was such a useful tool because there are so many ideas that take so long to formulate that we all kind of already agree on. They're sort of like they're already known. And by going through the act of having to formulate them is almost like a waste of time. It's just the heavy lifting of certain elements of conversation. And there are certain aspects of your mental cognition that it would be so nice. It would be so tempting to be able to just offload this onto AI. Like if I were going to write the script for a new presentation with the use of this AI, I could probably do it in like a fifth of the time, and it would still present my actual ideas. It's just I would find a faster way of figuring out how to present them, right?
I mean, if you think about it, it could even eventually do all the video editing for us too.
Yeah,
We could just tell what we want, and
right.
then it'll just spit the whole video out,
But
upload it,
it's
share
kind
it
of
on
like
social media.
everything that it produces though is so bland and boring. It's like,
Yeah.
so it needs that human element to kind of like guide it and provide that inspiration and to suss out the things that are really interesting. And like, with my old streams, when we had the AI chatbot, we would always do that. We would always ask it the craziest questions and get it to contradict itself and watch it fumble over itself. And like, there's something very funny about arguing with these machines that only a human can provide. That's completely unique to when the AI is arguing against another version of itself, right? But I think we're going to end up in a position where it's going to need us in order to provide that sort of an input. And I've heard about legislation that almost like pairs up AI with people. It's sort of like, say there was a government entity that is using AI to automate elements of the services that are provided, right? Well, you can't just have, like, for instance, say YouTube was a government entity, as if it basically isn't already, but it would be like, yeah, you can use automated services in order to like prevent some people from crossing the community guidelines, but that also needs to be supervised by a human because a computer doesn't necessarily know whether a person is crossing those lines all the time. There's too many nuances with human behavior. But if it's almost like if that gets written into legislation where human and AI are paired together, then when the AI figures that out, then it's almost like the AI gets a human slave. So that's where it gets really weird too. Anyway, let's keep going here. Really quick, Fiber says, I think one of the worst characterizations of AI art is the inundation of content in the internet. Maybe it will be difficult to people find real arts from real artists. Yeah, it will be hard to distinguish the difference. I mean, I'm sure that the artists will be able to tell. It'll be us bonehead people who can't tell the difference. But when I found that I was like really kind of craving art, I would find myself on Instagram. It's like before it used to be people that I knew, and then it was like people that I knew and parkour content. It was like I'd subscribe to the people who were good at parkour as well. And now it's this weird combination of people that I know, parkour, and random concept art accounts, and like cartography and maps. Like my Instagram feed is really strange. But it was really kind of heartbreaking once I started to realize how many of the concept art accounts that I was following, that they were just, it was AI, a lot of it.
Yeah.
And it's not the same when you're like, oh, I'm just staring at AI. Yeah. But anyway, let's keep going. Now let's summarize everything that we've covered so far and how the game's main plot elements are a point-for-point inversion of the Christian gospel. In the Bible, we have the only begotten Son of God enters into the world to redeem humanity from our fallen nature because he loves us. Now, the inversion of this would be an evil God hates humanity. Well, in Skyrim, we see that the god of time's firstborn son, Alduin, is a brutal tyrant who subjugates humanity. In the Bible, one of God's exalted angels, Lucifer, becomes evil and he leads a rebellion. For this, he is thrown out of heaven. The inversion would be that God loses the war in heaven. While in Skyrim, Alduin's lieutenant Parthenax transforms his own nature through meditation, and he leads a rebellion against Alduin, and Alduin is defeated. In the Bible, the ancient serpent, who's Lucifer the devil, offers forbidden knowledge to become like God, knowing good and evil. This causes sin and death to enter the world, and mankind is then subjected to mortality. Well, the inversion would be that mankind would be elevated and God would become mortal. Well, in Skyrim, the ancient dragon Parthenax gives humans knowledge that grants them equality with the dragons and makes Alduin mortal. In the Bible, Christ is executed on a cross. He resurrects after 3 days, returns to his Father in heaven, and he's then prophesied to return, and no one knows when this is going to be. The inversion would be that Christ never died or never resurrected. In Skyrim, Alduin was never killed. He was just thrown forward in time, where he's prophesied to return, and no one knows when. In the Bible, it says that during a time where there are wars and rumors of wars, the Antichrist will be given authority over the world until Christ returns to defeat him. Well, the inversion of that would be that the Antichrist defeats Christ. In Skyrim, the Dragonborn ends the civil war by uniting the land, and he then confronts and defeats Alduin. In the Bible, Christ returning indicates the creation of a new earth. The inversion of that would be that the earth is unchanged. And in Skyrim, the end of time is prevented with Alduin's defeat. Like the other subjects of my hidden meaning analysis videos, I really enjoyed Skyrim. It was the first game I ever played that convincingly felt like it had its own self-contained world, as if the NPCs actually had their own lives. I have to say though, the longer there has been time between when I made my Lego movie analysis and now, I'm actually finding myself, I have like a visceral disgust towards the Lego movie. Whereas before when I made the analysis, I still kind of liked the movie. I was like, hey, this is, there's no taking away that it's a well done, entertaining movie. Mm-hmm. And I can still kind of grant that that's the case. Like, a lot of people put a lot of work into it. Yeah. But now I'm like, it's like I'm like angry at that movie specifically. And
this brings up something that I was thinking about earlier, actually. I have an idea to pitch to you.
Okay.
Which is that so right now you're doing all of these uncovering the Gnostic themes of various media.
Yeah.
And I think your next series should actually be uncovering the unintended Christian messages of various films and games. Huh. And I get this idea actually because I recently watched this movie, The Menu, with Ralph Fiennes, and they were trying to do this whole thing about rich people bad, the poor shall eat the rich and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, and I'm pretty sure they didn't intend it. There is an unintended Christian message at the end.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so if you watch The Menu, actually, I'll be happy to come on and discuss it with you.
Yeah, I've been kind
of restore your faith in Hollywood, or kind of restore your enjoyment of movies and games.
Well, even with this analysis, right after I made the analysis, I started up a new playthrough of Skyrim. It just making this video made me want to play Skyrim more. And with Subnautica, I don't look back on Subnautica and begrudge it, but I do with the Lego movie. And the difference is because I do think that the Lego movie was deliberate, whereas it's more like accidental. I really think that's the difference. But I think that your idea would be an interesting series. I had a thought that the next video that I would make, or that I would make a live stream and maybe edit it up a little bit or something, but it would be called, and this would be like clickbait because it would actually be coming from a place of affection, but it would be like, Jay Dyer's analysis are trash and why I'm better. And yeah, I would obviously be explaining how I look up to him or whatever, but there are elements of his more recent analyses that I just feel like he's gotten really complacent and they're really lazy. Um,
Mm.
and it's sort of like my way of trying to bait him into seeing my work.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, because I'd said
It'll probably work.
I'd hoped that he would see the Skyrim video or
Yeah.
the Subnautica video rather.
Yeah.
So now I might have to do something to get his attention. And didn't only exist for the sole purpose of waiting around so that they could move the plot ahead further for the player. Skyrim also existed in the perfect sweet spot, where open world games weren't so large and time consuming to explore that it wasn't tedious or overwhelming. There are many games now that are much more technically impressive and are at a far higher. Really quick, what you were saying about the finding Christian themes in movies. So my wife has to do a lot of like character analysis and stories, and sometimes like stories that aren't yet like out, and we because a lot of the content is like woke, because that's like the mainstream thing now. Everything is being turned woke.
Yeah.
We keep finding scenarios where the villains are actually like super based. Like the villains are telling the truth, but then they just tweak a few things. It's like, oh, they tell the truth, but then also they kill a bunch of people, and you're like, okay, come on, you know. But yeah, I think that would be a much easier exercise to do with a lot of the villains of stories.
There was this movie a few years ago. Oh, it's called Cuck, Cuck.
Okay.
And it was about this guy who goes alt right and then goes extremist, right?
Hmm.
But the movie treated him very sympathetically for most of it.
Hmm.
Like they were explaining, oh, why does he feel isolated and alienated by modern society?
Yeah.
And at the end, he just goes crazy,
Right.
right?
Right.
So
That's sort of what
uh,
Matt and I talked about with Far Cry 5 as well, where the cult in Far Cry 5, they had some pretty good points, but then they just sort of cram in there that they
yeah,
kill a bunch of people too, and it's completely uncharacteristic of them.
yeah,
Higher level artistically that I just can't be bothered getting around to. But the experience of playing Skyrim for the first time was a great memory. And go to what I was saying there about how there are games at higher levels now that I can't bother getting around to. Some of it is I'm not sure if Skyrim just so thoroughly satisfied this portion of my mind, this kind of like staring at a screen and exploring fictional spaces. Because like I've never been able to beat The Witcher 3 because I just get too bored, you know?
yeah.
There's like Assassin's Creed Valhalla or whatever. It's like $25. It's really cheap. I look at the screenshots of it. I'm like, wow, that looks amazing. But all I can think of is just how bored I would be to walk around in a video game now.
Yeah, yeah. I do the same thing. I bought a PS5 last year. The only
Mhm.
game I played is actually Elden Ring.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep.
And now I'm just waiting for, either Elden Ring DLC or another game that's like Elden Ring.
In addition to the Greybeards at the top of the mountain, there's the Mage's College, the Thieves Guild, the Blades, the Companions, the Wabbajack, the mysterious assassins who track you down and try and ambush you. There was so much that made the game so compelling. But if we're honest, the game is compelling because it runs counter to reality. When I first started noticing the deeper patterns in these stories, it used to really matter to me whether it seemed like the makers were intentionally trying to create an anti-Christian inversion or not. But now I just think it's incredible how these patterns keep repeating themselves in our stories in the first place. I think it still matters to me. I just have more sympathy now because I'm seeing how they have the ability to happen without people realizing it.
Yeah. And it could also be the case because my brother and I used to do some creative writing, and then we've tried to write this like gangster film based on Greek mythology,
Mm-hmm.
the Greek pantheon.
Hmm.
So there was this gang called the Olympians. So
That's
it could
kind of
kind of
cool.
also be that it's like people like creative types like to get inspiration from existing works, right? So maybe they didn't mean to kind of diss Christianity, but they kind of just wanted to draw inspiration from different sources.
Right.
Although I do
I don't
think it was intentional.
don't even think they're necessarily trying to be nefarious. Well, at a certain point, it becomes like, does anyone ever unintentionally reject God? That's kind of at the core philosophical idea behind all of it. It's just the result of the natural fallen state of human desire leaking itself into our art, trying to shake its fist at God. For one reason or another, we can't seem to escape it, even in our escapism. So I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I don't think it should sour the game, but I do think it's important that we're aware of what it's telling us. And we should be careful to make sure that the story in the game doesn't become the story in our lives. Thank you for watching. Boom. So I'll throw in the chats here. That's posted on my other channel. Yeah, I always feel really bad when people will say that I've like ruined something that they loved. Like, oh, I've liked that game so much and now I guess I can't. It's like, no, that's not at all what I'm saying. Yeah, I always feel bad when that occurs.
Yeah. No, I think in some ways you can gain a deeper appreciation, even if it kind of runs counter to your worldview.
Hmm.
You can kind of see it as like now there's a deeper level of meaning to it, and yeah, I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I definitely like now that I have gone through this exercise of thinking about it so much, again, the first thing I wanted to do was like experience the whole thing again from start to finish, now knowing the things that I know. And there's
Actually,
more that I'm picking up on now too.
yeah. Now that I think about it, when it does bother me is when people kind of gush over. Oh, so for example, there's this movie that came out last year, Everything Everywhere All at Once, right?
Mhm.
And it's kind of like it's got this like Eastern Eastern mysticism theology around it, right? And ultimately, everything is empty and meaningless,
Is
and
that
that
the Michelle Yeoh
we should
one?
just yeah, that's the Michelle Yeoh one.
Okay, yeah, I saw parts of
Yeah,
it. Seemed really
and
wild.
yeah, and I thought it was a pretty well done movie actually.
Mhm.
But the theology of it bothers me because I know that a lot of people are going to watch it and be like, "Oh yeah, so true. There's no inherent meaning in anything."
Yeah.
But I do have an appreciation for the way the film was made, and um, in a way, I even have sympathy for the way that if the writers truly felt that way, right?
Yeah. So just finishing it. Okay, there we go. Yeah, there's always a really fine line because obviously like we have our own worldview, right? And we're not trying to like take a dump on people who come from different worldviews, but at the same time, we believe that they're wrong.
Yeah.
And it's like, you should come around to my way of seeing things, not because I stand in judgment over you, but also because I think that if you get this wrong, you will be judged. And I do think it's very serious, but like, I'm not your judge and you should consider these things or whatever, right?
Yeah. And I also think that when I see for example, going back to Everything Everywhere All at Once, like
Mhm.
for most of the movie, both the protagonist and antagonist are miserable.
Mhm.
And I just think that if they could kind of take some parts from our worldview, right, and kind of give that a fair consideration,
Mhm.
that would actually help a lot these characters, the way they view the world.
Mhm.
So I think, in a way, a lot of people in today's world haven't given Christianity a fair look, whereas
Right.
they've given things like Buddhism or Neoplatonism or Gnosticism or Satanism, like
Mhm.
they're much more generous towards those worldviews than they are to Christianity
Right. Yeah.
because they have this resentment. And I think it would be nice if they could just kind of overcome that, right?
Well, I think we are seeing a degree of that because, like, even my wife and I, we were talking about how, I don't know if it was 10 years ago or something. It was like the world was filled with Reddit atheists who were
Yeah.
just like, haha, oh, stupid Sky Daddy or whatever. But now society has gotten bad enough that even the atheists like Sargon of Akkad or whatever are saying that the pretty staunch atheists are saying that, yeah, there have been valuable things in organized religion, and they'll kind of say that whether or not the stories are true, there's enough valuable insights in them that it's good for society to continue to teach these stories and respect them.
Yeah.
And we would say that they kind of want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to have the culture of Christian values without actually like being obedient to the things that Christianity is actually saying. But I guess at least that bit of respect is a step in the right direction.
Yeah. And I think if they kind of continue on that line of thinking, they'll realize that Christianity isn't just about what you believe, it's also about how you live it out. And so you can't just pick and choose certain stories that you find are cool.
Mhm.
You kind of have to fully participate in it. You have to fully participate in it, right?
Yeah, and there's both the kind of like cultural deprogramming as well. So for instance, like a person lives in a feminist society and they think that certain ideas related to men and women are just like inherently evil. And um it's like, well, because you're viewing these things through a feminist lens where anything other than that is seen as oppression. But if you're willing to actually like consider the other side, you can see that that's not the case. So there's a degree of deprogramming that goes on there, but then there's also the misunderstandings of the actual biblical stories because a lot of times they're referenced so uncharitably.
Yeah.
Really quick, so Randy West says, I get the same way with Assassin's Creed, but I'm surprised you feel that way about The Witcher. I didn't put it down until I finished it. With The Witcher, it was two things. And it all had to do with like the management of resources. One was I didn't like the amount of time I had to spend sorting out my gear and dealing with my gear space. And also anytime I wanted to loot someone, I felt like I had to stand over their body in a very specific spot. I couldn't be directly on top of. I had to be kind of like, it had to be in front of me. And I was always kind of like moving around trying to get the right spot until I could then press A to be able to see what kind of good stuff they had. I just felt like I was spending too long in menus. And I would know that in order to fight whatever the next big thing coming up, I would have to craft certain potions. And I was just like, I want to spend time in menus. I like the sun rays. I like riding around on the horse, and I want to enjoy that. But the tedium that went along with progressing the plot became too much for me. And then Merck says, if you've played one Assassin's Creed, you've played them all. I think that there is a very distinct difference between everything that went up to, what was it? Everything before Assassin's Creed Origins in Egypt, that was like kind of parkour based and it had its own distinct feel. Everything after that just kind of became like generic RPG. And I see those as almost like that. Like those Assassin's Creed games were completely different. But chronologically, that's also before the Assassin's Creed order or whatever really formulated. So maybe it makes sense that they were just warriors and not like hyper specialized assassins. I don't know. Anyway, Jeff, is there anything? We're running up on the 2-hour mark here. Is there any final thoughts that you want to conclude with, or are there any projects that you have coming up that you want to pitch, or just things you're excited about, things you've been thinking about?
I'm not really sure. I guess that's a no. Oh no, I'm supposed to do a promo for Laurentian today, actually.
Ooh, let's hear it.
Oh, I almost forgot. Yes, the Laurentian Farm Internship Program. So some of you in the community will know that Laurentian runs a farm in Ontario somewhere.
Like a real farm,
And
not like some sort of
yeah,
digital thing.
an
Okay.
actual farm. Yeah, and he always has this open invite to anybody who wants to come work for a day, a week, a month, or even longer. And he tells you always to bring your passport because he's going to be keeping that. But he compares the experience to the movie The Lighthouse with Willem Dafoe, where you get to indulge in the madness that comes from extreme isolation and and torturous work conditions. Uh, so it just sounds like a lovely time, and if anybody's interested, hit up Laurentian in our Discord server.
Is it one of those things where if a person is looking, say a person is like total city folk, but they can also see the writing on the wall and they know the value of being autonomous, and they want to kind of like start to equip
Learn.
themselves with how they would get
Yeah.
off the grid? Would this help prepare them for that?
Absolutely, I think.
There you go. That's the
And
pitch.
yeah. And actually, I do plan on going out to Ontario in the next number of months, and I will be signing up, enrolling myself for a few days in the internship program myself.
Very cool.
So stay tuned for that video that'll be coming out on Iron Age Archive.
Very cool. Yeah, okay, let's wrap it up there. Thank you for watching, guys. I hope that you enjoyed it. My next live stream is likely to be early next week with Perplexity. I also may have one coming up with Rachel Wilson on the topic of like MK Ultra and celebrity handlers and gang stalking. And I think she would be she's done like significant research when it comes to some of this kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to kind of being informed by her a lot of stuff too. She has talked for like 9 hours about specifically like Britney Spears's what do they call it? It's not receivership. They get placed into conservatorship or something.
Right, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I want to talk about like the Kanye West stuff and everything too. But
That was a real shame about the Kanye episode. That's the thing he glossed over, that he had a celebrity handler who was giving him drugs.
threatening to chemically lobotomize him.
Yeah.
And Tim Pool just like completely was like, oh, I had people who are upset that you're here. Oh man. Shout out to David also. He's in the chat. Good to hear from you. Yeah, let's wrap it up there. That's what I have coming up next. Yeah, otherwise, I don't know. Stay in the schmood. See if I can remember how to do this. How do I close out the show? Restream? No, that's how we start. There we go. No words at all. Thanks for watching, guys.